Chapter 6. Summer Nights. "Orange bastards!" shouted Mo in the direction of the approaching Orange Order parade. "Unionist triumphalism," sneered Jerry. 500 years of British oppression," shouted Den. I was standing with a group of youth club members and a few of my neighbours in front of a line of 50-foot high steel barriers that cut across the main Antrim Road. The British Army had carried out this impressive feat of engineering earlier that morning, forming a temporary peace wall to block the road and stop us from killing each other. The ingenuity and money available to keep us apart knew no bounds. Dozens of police Land Rovers and army tanks held the barriers in place, while scores of soldiers and armed policemen stood with their backs to us, facing the parade. This choice of stance suggested whose side they were on. Through gaps in the barriers, we caught glimpses of rows of older men in bowler hats with orange sashes marching and carrying their banners, followed by younger men in baseball caps with blue plastic bags marching and carrying their beer cans. "Sorry about your dad, Tone," said Billy quietly, arriving late to the scene, before turning his attention to the British Army and starting to roar, "Brits out! Brits out! Brits out!" "Fucking hands!" shouted Tonto at the top of his voice, jumping up and down as if he might just see over the top of the barriers. "Fenian bastards!" replied a snarling orange man. I could see through the fence that he was almost dribbling onto his collarette. It was a normal summer Saturday in North Belfast. Today was the day of a big parade, and the security forces had blocked the road so that the orange men could follow their traditional route through a neighbourhood where few Protestants lived anymore. The young people had got up much earlier than usual just to be offended by this outrage. I had got up at my usual time, and I was quite outraged myself. The security barriers had blocked me in. I was annoyed because I had been unable to get to the shop to buy milk for my cornflakes. In fact, I couldn't really go anywhere until the march was over. If the marchers didn't hurry up, I was going to be late for a date with Lesley to see Police Academy 3. You see, cried Den, pointing at the passing orange parade. "You wouldn't believe what it was like. We get blocked in all the time, like second-class citizens, so they can march through our areas." I refused to accept the whole idea of our area and their area, and generally went wherever I wanted in Belfast. Today in the city, you still hear people talking about an area being Protestant or Catholic, Republican or Loyalist, as if a group of streets and buildings could have a political identity, or about Catholic and Protestant houses, as if buildings, like their residents, were also aligned with a church they didn't go to. The land beneath these streets was here long before these man-made identities claimed it. And I'm sure our land will remain when the current residents and our selfish squabbles are buried beneath it. "I know, I see," I replied. Where I had grown up, an Orange Order parade was a family event, at which children in prams waved mini flags at their grandas, and mothers handed out egg and onion sandwiches and cups of tea in plastic tumblers. Today, I was experiencing an orange parade in different moccasins. I felt hemmed in, and I didn't like it. The young people seemed to hate orange men even more than they hated the Brits, which was very worrying because even if the IRA did manage to bomb the Brits out, they would have a much bigger job in their hands, forcing out the hundreds of thousands of orange men who lived all over Northern Ireland. "Come on, lads, stop the sectarian name-calling," I said, aware I was sounding a tad sanctimonious in the circumstances. I knew it wouldn't take much for this situation to descend into violence. The young people would justify their part in any street disturbances from their sense of injustice, and I feared they would end up being hurt or arrested. This was a practical opportunity for me to try to prevent that. "They're the bigots," interrupted Mo. "The Brits and the Peelers have blocked us in so themans can march and wave their flags at us over baiting the Catholics in some battle in 1690. "I know, but lads, do you not think you're getting a wee bit sectarian yourselves, coming down here just to shout abuse at them?" I dared to ask. My gentle challenge was undermined by the arrival of several empty beer cans and a red brick over the top of the barrier, accompanied by a heightened volume of drumming, along with the shouts of "Yo!" and "Kill all Tiggs!" You see, Tony, that's how sectarian they are. Sectarian Protestant bastards, every fucking one of them, said Den. But lads, are you not making yourselves just as bad as them by shouting back? I ventured. They're the bigots, and guess what? Cilla Blacks are prize a fucking prize. The Brits and the RUC are helping them, said Jerry. We don't want no orange feet on our roads, said Mo. Kill all prods, shouted Billy. It was clear that the conversation was over. An assault on the dividing fences and the RUC was brewing. My influence was proving to be limited, and if I wasn't careful, I could find myself in a crowd attacking the police. I returned to the bedsit for a depressing bowl of dry cornflakes as a riot developed outside my window. Summers in Belfast were for fighting. It wasn't a proper summer on the peace line without riots. For us youth workers in North Belfast, they were part of the annual calendar. The advent of petrol bombs at the peace line in the marching season was just as predictable as the arrival of the baby Jesus at Christmas. This was turning out to be a good year for riots because of the Anglo-Irish Agreement, which was signed in November 1985. Unionists were so outraged by the agreement, which gave the Irish government an advisory role in the government of Northern Ireland, that young working-class Protestants now had tacit permission to attack the police with as much vigour as the other side. Meanwhile, Republicans saw riots as the best way to show that our sectarian statelet had failed, so they were well worth the sacrifice of their disaffected youth. While the politicians spoke out from the comfort of television studios, the poorest young men in their communities were on the streets, injured or imprisoned or both, for acting out the anger of their leaders and their communities. I had always mistrusted politicians and their sectarian soundbites about how much we needed to vote for them to keep the other side out. To be fair, the fact they never did much more for the people than keep the other side out was at least sticking to their manifestos. Ultimately, this was the only thing that most people cared about, so they voted the same men back in every time. And the areas of highest social deprivation and worst educational achievement never improved. The young men who answered the call and did all the rioting remained poor and forgotten. Going to live on the other side contradicted everything most politicians in Belfast stood for. Perhaps my decision was political in the sense that it was anti-political, anti-every sectarian political diatribe. I was learning more and more every day by living on the other side. In fact, I was beginning to think it should be made compulsory, and then we would all wise up, understand each other better, and catch ourselves on. Orange parades and bonfires were an important part of the culture I was born into, but they weren't important to me. In my youth, I had enjoyed the bonies on the 11th night, groups of friends building and guarding a bonfire, and then a party around it, baking potatoes in tinfoil. This was long before the bonfires became the property of local paramilitary gangsters, who turned them into industrial mega-bonies and built them with lorry loads of tyres and wooden pallets, all in the name of displaying control of their communities. I regretted that bonfire nights were increasingly dominated by underage drinking, paramilitary displays and burning Irish flags. I always found the endless marching to the same old musical repertoire on the 12th incredibly boring. Some families were devoted to the Orange Order and the band's tradition and gave hours to their cultural heritage, but my family had largely become distanced from all of that, though they still went to watch the marches on the 12th itself. Both my grandfathers had been Orange men, and my father marched on the 12th in his youth. But when the trouble started, he felt the Orange Order was too closely associated with paramilitaries. In fact, I was forbidden by him from joining the Orange Order. This was ironic, as I was never invited to join. It's even more ironic that the Orange Order is the only organisation that has never asked me to join, that has members who've expressed resentment towards me for not being a member. It's a bit like not being invited to a family wedding and then being criticised for not going by the people who never invited you. Of course, I had no intention of joining the Orange Order. Apart from the obvious clash with my belief that Christians were called to make peace rather than celebrate a battle victory, from an early age I had connected orange parades and orange halls with alcohol abuse. My immersion in evangelical religious tradition, combined with revulsion at my father's heavy drinking, meant that I was teetotal. As a teenager, I taught Sunday school every week in an orange hall. My abiding memory is not of banners expressing loyalty to God or the Queen, but the smell of stale beer that had been spilled on the tables the night before. Although there were thousands of flags waved every 12th, they were far outnumbered by the tens of thousands of units of alcohol consumed. None of the religious organisations I was involved in permitted alcohol at any of their events, not even a glass of wine at the Sunday school teacher's Christmas dinner. I often wondered how sincere these marching men were about God. They clearly loved their country and had great pride in their cultural heritage, but it seemed to me that for most of them, the religious part was more about cultural Protestantism than faith in God. There were orange services in the church all the time, but very few of the men who came to these services ever came to church otherwise, unless it was with a flag and a band, a baby, a bride, or in a coffin. When I saw orange leaders speak on TV, some of them sounded sincerely religious, and I wondered why they had allowed their organisation to become so publicly irreligious with drunk and disorderly events. Either they weren't as sincere as they appeared, or perhaps my father had been right, and they were afraid to stand up to the paramilitaries, who loved their beer almost as much as they loved Ulster. My father, my late father, was a very clever man, you know. Although summer in Belfast was all about our culture, or their culture, or two competing cultures, I noticed we had a shared culture. Living on the other side revealed to me that we shared a deeply embedded culture of blame, violence and sectarianism. To distract the youth of the New Lodge, we organised summer schemes and trips away from the city as an alternative to rioting. We advertised the summer scheme by walking along the streets and parks on summer nights, chatting to young people and giving out leaflets inviting them to sign up. I generally got a warm response, albeit with an appropriate degree of slagging about being a snobby Christian and a specky bastard. I felt safe most of the time, even though it was obvious I was a Protestant from the Salt Shaker Centre walking around a Republican area. Some people told me my head was away, and that taking this risk was suicidal, but I felt safe, and I had recently learned from bitter experience about people who were truly suicidal. The truth is that beneath the nasty sectarian exterior, many Belfast people are much more tolerant than you would expect, especially face to face. One of the best places for advertising the summer scheme was at the Waterworks, one of the largest parks in North Belfast. In the 19th century, the Belfast Waterworks had been reservoirs supplying water to the city's factories and residents. When demand began to outstrip supply and new reservoirs were created, the area was transformed into a leisure park, complete with boating and outdoor swimming. During the Second World War, the German bombers mistook the waterworks for the shipyard, and many lives were lost in the surrounding streets. But by the 1980s, the days of genteel rowing boats, public bathing and swimming galas were a distant memory. This once beautiful park was now the scene of an ugly sectarian turf war. For many people, it was important to establish whether the ripples covering the submerged shopping trolleys from Stewart's supermarket were British or Irish waters. The top end of the waterworks, beside the Westland Road, was Protestant, and the bottom part of the waterworks, beside the Antrim Road, was Catholic. Unionists walked their Protestant dogs in the top end of the park, while Republican young people drank their Catholic cider in the bottom end. On summer nights we walked through the parks in pairs and had many good conversations with bored teenagers about how fed up they were with Belfast and how it was all the other side's fault. I always knew it was time to withdraw when the drink-fueled talk became more aggressive, or when some of the gang's attention was drawn to the presence of the enemy in the form of the other side, the police, the army, or your man that moans to our mas about us drinking in the park. However, we managed to attract some of the bored youth from the bottom end of the waterworks to our summer scheme trips. Obviously our trips weren't as exciting as petrol bombing a Protestant pensioner's house for equal rights, but some of them were very eventful. Our barbecues were remarkably trouble-free, which proved to me that there was nothing wrong with our young people. It was the social and political environment that brought out the worst in them. Many had never been to the places we visited before, even though most of our destinations were less than an hour from Belfast. Our barbecues to Drains Bay on the Antrim Coast Road were a mixture of hide-and-seek, games, races, hunts, hot dogs with tomato ketchup and bottles of orangeade. Things did get a bit more exciting on one occasion when Kieran announced he would be waiting in the bushes beside the car park if anyone wanted to join him for sex. No one dared to enter the bushes to retrieve him, but fortunately only one girl had to be pulled out of his thorny den by the feet before she got too close. Our trips to Tollymore Forest Park required strict adherence to minibus etiquette to ensure our vehicle wasn't stoned, hijacked or burned. No sectarian songs were committed during the journey, although Jerry argued that a rebel song was not a sectarian song, and we finally allowed the Fields of Athenry. Giving the finger to pedestrians in streets with red, white and blue painted curbstones, and cheering triumphantly when we entered a town or village with Irish tricolours on the lampposts were usually the highlights of the journey. It was like being in a travelling pantomime where you booed the bad streets and cheered the good. This reminded me of my many trips away with the Westie Disco when I was a teenager, except the boos and cheers were in reverse. A team of summer scheme volunteers joined us and slept on the floor of the church hall for 2 weeks. These students from Northern Ireland, England and the USA supported the regular youth club leaders who knew the young people better and had vital knowledge like who was most likely to smuggle drink onto the minibus or start a fight on the way home. It was clear that getting away from the tensions and experiencing even slightly wider horizons was a positive experience for most of the young people, whose world was often defined about where to go and not to go to avoid getting your head kicked in. One of our most popular summer scheme trips was the children's trip to Belfast Zoo at the top of the Antrim Road. It was inexpensive, we could reach it quickly without crossing any peace lines, and the children loved the animals. It was the annual highlight for the younger kids in the summer scheme. This year, as leader in charge of the trip, I was excited about making sure everyone had a happy day out. The day was already hot when we arrived there in 2 minibuses with 30 primary school aged children and 30 plastic bags containing packed lunches of cheese sandwiches the volunteers had prepared the night before, along with crisps and cheap pop. All went well until we arrived at the prairie dogs enclosure. Dozens of these mischievous little rodents lived in a large underground burrow beneath mounds of dirt, where they sat alert and scanning for predators. Such was their enthusiasm for breeding, the prairie dogs seemed to be taking over a whole section of the zoo, almost the whole way down to the derelict 1930s Art Deco ballroom, the Floral Hall, a sad relic of the age of Belfast show bands and dances. The drama began when the Ginger twins who were on the trip climbed over the low wall into the prairie dog enclosure. "Boys, get out of there now before they bite you," I shouted after them. The zookeeper arrived on the scene promptly. "Can you not control them wee hellions?" he asked. The other 28 children were squealing with delight at the sight of the twins chasing scores of the little creatures in every direction. "Twins, will you get out of there now?" I shouted. But the laughing boys were oblivious to anything outside of the enclosure. How will I tell their mother that I let her twins get rabies? I wondered. "Boys, if you don't get out of there now, you're banned from the next trip to Drains Bay," I threatened. The other children were now squealing with excitement. "Can you not control them?" said the zookeeper, red-faced and angry. Not really, I thought. "Of course I can," I replied indignantly. "They are in great danger," shouted the zookeeper. "I'm the youth leader in charge," I explained as calmly as possible. "I'm sorry they won't come out. They'll get bored soon. They are in great danger. They are in great danger," he repeated into his walkie-talkie. Now I was starting to panic. I was going to be responsible for the twins being mauled to death by a pack of prairie dogs. Then I spotted, with some relief, a notice saying that prairie dogs were herbivores. "How much danger are the children in?" I asked urgently. "I'm not talking about the wee lads, son," replied the zookeeper. "I was talking about the bloody prairie dogs." Yes, it was a typical summer in Belfast. And while the fighting continued on the streets below, on a hot summer day in 1986, in a beautiful zoo on the slopes of the Cave Hill, the ginger twins and the prairie dogs had the best time ever. Later, when I tried to tell Lesley this story, I could barely get through it without laughing. I laughed until I cried. It felt good to cry, not out of grief.